Imagine if Amazon suddenly bought a fleet of F-16 fighter jets, hired 500,000 mercenaries, and decided to forcefully annex Canada just to sell more servers. It sounds like absolute madness, but that is exactly what a small startup from London did in the 17th century. At the time, pepper and spices were worth more than gold, but sailing to Asia to get them was basically a suicide mission. The solution? A group of 218 London merchants gathered in a small hall and came up with the stupidest yet most brilliant idea in the history of capitalism. What if we pool our money to create the first multinational corporation in history and accidentally take over the world? Queen Elizabeth I loved the pitch and granted them a total monopoly. Thus, the East India Company was born. The original startup. The beginning, of course, was brutal. In 1601, Captain James Lancaster commands the first fleet to Asia. He faces storms, pirates, and the dreaded scurvy, but manages to return with enough pepper to hand out absurd profits to the shareholders. The company proves that risking death and dysentery is entirely worth it when the profit margin hits 300%. The wheel of corporate greed had started turning, and no one was going to be able to stop it. But startups tend to lose their sense of danger. Over the following decades, the company grew, but the egos of its directors grew even faster. Enter Josiah Child, the tech bro CEO of his era. He looked at the Mughal Empire, the richest and most powerful superpower on Earth at the time, and thought, why just trade when we can dictate the rules? Child decides to declare war on the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. The result was humiliating. The Mughal Emperor stepped on the company like a bug. He confiscated their factories, arrested the merchants, and made Josiah Child beg on his knees for forgiveness. The emperor, taking pity on them, allowed the company to resume operations only after they paid a colossal fine. A lesson in humility for the English, right? Wrong. If you think corporate arrogance has limits, you haven't been paying attention to capitalism. Fast forward to the 18th century. The company had learned that to win, merchant ships weren't enough. They needed gunpowder and bribery. The Mughal Empire began to crumble from the inside, fracturing into pieces. The company saw the power vacuum and embraced its new identity, a corporation with a private army larger than that of most nations. And who was the architect of this hostile takeover? A young former clerk named Robert Clive. Clive was a highly functional psychopath. He wasn't a genius military strategist. He was a businessman with delusions of grandeur. The great turning point occurs in 1757 at the Battle of Plassey. Clive doesn't win the battle using brilliant field tactics. He uses Wall Street's favorite weapon, cash. He conspires with local bankers, the powerful Jagat Seths, to buy the loyalty of the Bengal army's general. It was a corporate acquisition, just with cannons and elephants. Suddenly, a private company owns the richest region on the Indian subcontinent. The company was now collecting taxes from tens of millions of Indians. And what did they do with this money? They funded their own army and guaranteed shareholder dividends in London. The result of privatizing an entire nation was catastrophic. In 1770, a massive drought hit Bengal. Instead of opening reserves or lowering taxes, the company raised rates by 10% and forced farmers to grow silk and indigo instead of rice. The Bengal famine killed a third of the local population, around 10 million people. And you know what the company's response was the following year? They increased shareholder dividends from 10 to 12.5%, the pure essence of corporate evil contained in an Excel spreadsheet. But financial karma is relentless. The company nearly sank itself. Internal corruption, smuggling by its own employees, and the absurd costs of its private army destroyed their cash flow. In 1773, the richest corporation in the world went to the government begging for money. They basically invented the concept of too big to fail. The British Parliament handed them a monumental bailout of £1.4 million. Privatize the profits, socialize the losses. Some things never change. We reach the 19th century and the company faces a new existential crisis: tea. Britain had developed an incurable addiction to Chinese tea. But China, ruled by the Qing dynasty, didn't want to buy any British products. They only accepted one form of payment: pure silver. British silver was draining out so fast it threatened to break the Bank of England. The company desperately needed something China wanted to buy. They looked at their fields in India and had a dark epiphany. What if we become drug lords? The The company monopolized opium production in India and began smuggling thousands of tons of the narcotic substance into China. The East India Company became the largest and most ruthless state-sanctioned drug cartel in world history. The plan worked terribly well. Millions of Chinese became addicted. When the Chinese government finally said enough and confiscated the British opium, the company didn't back down. They lobbied in London and the British government sent the Royal Navy. The Opium Wars were exactly that, a transnational corporation using its country's armed forces to force a sovereign nation to legalize drug trafficking and open its ports. A brilliant victory for the free market, right? But no bubble of corporate arrogance lasts forever. The pressure cooker finally exploded in 1857. The backbone of the company's army, the sepoys, Indian soldiers, rebelled. The spark was a rumor that the new rifle cartridges, which had to be bitten open, were greased with cow and pig fat, a mortal offense to both Hindus and Muslims. But the cartridges were just the final straw. The rebellion was the result of a century of brutal exploitation, systemic racism, illegal annexations, and extortion. The uprising was an epic bloodbath that nearly swept the British out of India entirely. The company, in all its arrogance, completely lost control. The British government, horrified and embarrassed by the incompetence of corporate management, said, "Playtime is over." In 1858, the East India Company was formally stripped of its powers. The British government nationalized the company's army, took over its territories, and officially launched the British Raj. The corporation didn't go bankrupt overnight, but it became a corporate zombie until it was officially dissolved in 1874. The story of the East India Company is a terrifying lesson in what happens when corporate power goes completely unchecked. It showed how the single-minded pursuit of profit, divorced from any moral compass, can turn a business into an oppressive, militarized state. When does a corporation become more powerful than a government? And what happens when a company's bottom line becomes a nation's foreign policy? The bill for the East India Company's actions eventually came due, and it was paid not by its shareholders in London, but by millions of lives across the globe. Until the next tale of economic disaster, you dividend-worshipping fools.